Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going deep on Genghis Khan.
Mm-hmm.
Our listeners sent in a bunch of stuff on him, and
Yeah.
it seems like everyone wants to go beyond that one-dimensional, brutal conqueror image.
It's there, but yeah, there's so much more to him.
Yeah.
I was surprised by some of the things we found, actually.
Right. Okay, well, so we all know the Mongols were amazing warriors.
Yeah.
But was there something more to it than just, brute force?
Absolutely. I mean, what gets me is how incredibly, strategically brilliant they were. Like, take their horseback archery skills, for example. I mean, they could shoot accurately while riding full speed. It's pretty mind-blowing.
I've read about it, but, it's hard to picture how effective that would have been on an actual battlefield.
Well, I know, right? Imagine you're on the other side, right? You see this huge cloud of dust in the distance, and all of a sudden you're just getting peppered with arrows from these crazy skilled archers on horseback coming at you full speed.
That'd be terrifying.
Oh, for sure. And nearly impossible to defend against, too.
Wow. And weren't they famous for psychological warfare?
Well, big time. The Mongols, masters of deception, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd put dummies on extra horses to make their army look bigger.
Oh, wow.
Or how about this? They'd create these fake dust storms to confuse the enemy.
What?
Yeah. And they'd even pretend to retreat just to lure their opponents into a perfectly planned ambush.
So they were using fear and misdirection way back then, centuries before modern armies even thought of those tactics.
Exactly. I mean, sure, other armies had tried some of those tricks before, but the Mongols, they took it to a whole new level. They combined speed, deception, and just incredibly coordinated attacks.
So efficient, too.
Totally. And it allowed them to conquer huge amounts of territory, way more than you'd think, looking just their numbers.
It is amazing what they accomplished. But we can't forget the other side, right? The destruction. I mean, it was massive.
Right. Millions of lives were lost. There's just no getting around that. And tons of cities were completely destroyed. It was devastating, no question. But there's also this weird, environmental twist to it that most people don't know about.
Right. That's what I was just thinking about. There was some kind of positive environmental impact from the conquests. I was reading about that.
Yeah, it's strange, right? You wouldn't expect it. But all those deaths actually led to massive reforestation across Eurasia.
Really?
Yeah. Fewer people meant less farming, which meant huge areas just went back to being forests, which of course takes tons of carbon out of the atmosphere.
So the conquests, as horrible as they were, actually ended up cooling the planet a little.
Exactly. It's just one example of how these historical events can have crazy, unpredictable ripple effects. Genghis Khan, the conqueror, accidentally ended up like a mini climate hero. Who knew, right?
That's pretty wild. Makes you think about what kinds of unforeseen consequences are happening right now because of, big events in our time.
Oh, totally. History's always reminding us that our actions can have consequences we don't even realize, far beyond what we can see at the time.
So true. Okay, well, speaking of unexpected consequences, all the stuff about Genghis Khan's progressive side, that was super interesting to me.
Yeah, a lot of folks are surprised when they hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, he had this rep for brutality, so how do you square that with someone who, promoted social mobility and stuff? What made him do things that seemed so forward-thinking for his time?
Well, it seems like he knew that to build a powerful empire that would last, you needed more than just a strong military.
Yo, interesting.
Yeah, I think he really got that you needed a system where people were rewarded for their skills and their loyalty, no matter what family they were born into.
So he wasn't just a warlord, he was thinking long-term.
Exactly. He put policies in place that seemed really modern, to be honest, like exempting poor people and the clergy from paying taxes, or encouraging everyone in the empire to learn to read and write.
Right.
He even organized a huge debate between Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists.
You're kidding. An interfaith debate way back in the 13th century.
Yep. I mean, that shows a level of open-mindedness that was super rare back then.
It really does. Okay, so there's definitely a lot more to Genghis Khan than we usually think about.
Oh, tons more. Just wait till we get into his personal life, for example. Now that's where things get really mysterious.
I know. It's kind of crazy how someone who lived, 800 years ago can still be so mysterious.
Right. It really is.
And it's not just, the big stuff. Even basic things about him are still, up for debate, like what he actually looked like.
Yeah, like that whole red hair, blue-green eyes thing.
Exactly. I mean, that doesn't sound like what you picture when you think, Mongol warrior.
Not at all. It
Yes.
definitely challenges, our stereotypes, And then there's the fact that he never let anyone, paint him or make any kind of image of him while he was alive.
That's kind of weird when you think about it, right? I mean, for a guy who wanted to project power and authority, why do you think he did that? Like, why stay visually unknown?
Good question. Some historians think he wanted to build up this, like, aura of mystery around himself, make him seem almost larger than life. But others think maybe he believed his true image, like his real image, should only be preserved in stories and legends, not, in some painting.
It's almost like he wanted to, like, control his own narrative even after he was gone.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And you could argue he kind of succeeded, right? I mean, here we are centuries later, still trying to figure out who he really was.
Absolutely. We are definitely still trying to piece together the puzzle of Genghis Khan, and there are a lot of pieces, that's for sure. His legacy, I mean, it's just massive and, touches so many different things. Where do you even start with something like that?
Well, how about his genetic legacy? Get this. It's estimated that something like 8% of men in Asia, like right now, are direct descendants of Genghis Khan.
Seriously. That's insane.
Yeah. That could make him the most successful, biologically speaking, father in all of history.
That's incredible.
It really shows you the scale of his empire. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of descendants, and beyond, genetics. His impact on cultural exchange was huge, like monumental.
Right, the Silk Road, it became like this super highway connecting East and West under his rule.
Yeah, exactly. His empire really made it possible for different cultures to interact in a way they never had before. It was like this huge mixing of ideas and knowledge and technology and art all across Eurasia.
And we're still seeing the effects of that today, right?
Yeah.
In everything from like art and architecture to food and, all sorts of things.
For sure. It's mind-blowing to think about how one person's actions could have such a lasting impact.
And let's not forget the Taj Mahal.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most famous buildings in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
The emperor who built it, Shah Jahan, he was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan.
It's wild. Even the Taj Mahal, this incredible masterpiece, has a connection to the Khan. It's a real testament to the, enduring power of his bloodline.
It makes you think about how connected history really is, How things that seem totally unrelated can actually have these crazy links back to each other.
I know. It's, like you said, history is a puzzle.
Totally. And we've seen so much of that in this deep dive already. I mean, the military stuff, the environmental impact, the surprisingly progressive policies, the personal mysteries. It's almost like he was playing a different game than everyone else.
He was definitely a visionary, that's for sure. But he was also, a product of his time.
Yeah.
With all the, good and bad that comes with that. Like his Yassa code, for example.
Well, yeah, the legal code he established for the empire.
Exactly.
I read that it was pretty progressive for its time, but it also, included some really harsh punishments, too.
True.
Yeah.
It's a good example of how complex he was. The Yassa code had a lot of really forward-thinking elements. It promoted things like meritocracy and religious tolerance and even environmental protection.
Environmental protection? Really? I mean, that's surprising. In the 13th century, you wouldn't think that would be a priority. What kinds of laws did they have?
Well, for example, there were rules against cutting down trees at certain times of the year, and also laws against polluting water sources.
Interesting.
Yeah, it shows that they actually recognized how important it was to preserve natural resources. You don't see that a lot back then.
It does seem like he was ahead of his time in some ways. But what about those harsh punishments? I mean, how do you reconcile those with the progressive stuff?
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around, laws about protecting the environment, but then right alongside them, these super harsh punishments for other things.
It does seem like a contradiction. But I think it really shows, the two sides of Genghis Khan's rule. The Yassa code, it was all about creating order and stability. And for him, that meant, promoting certain values, sure, but it also meant punishing anyone who broke the rules and punishing them hard. So it wasn't just about being cruel. It was more about making sure the empire, could actually function.
Exactly. A lot of those punishments, yeah, they seem brutal to us now. But back then, they were meant to stop people from doing things that could, really destabilize the empire. Stuff like theft or treason or, refusing to follow orders during a war.
I can see how he'd want to keep things under control, especially with an empire that huge, with all those different cultures and everything.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget his belief in Tengri.
Right, the eternal blue sky.
Yeah. He really believed that Tengri was the source of all his authority and that his conquests were destined by, this higher power.
So even though he's like conquering these vast territories and reshaping the map, he still felt like he was answerable to something bigger than himself.
I think so, yeah. It definitely makes him a more complex figure, that's for sure. And here's another interesting thing. Genghis Khan himself couldn't read.
He was illiterate.
Yeah. But he knew that literacy, like being able to read and write, was super important if you wanted to run a country effectively.
Huh. So even though he couldn't read, he made sure everyone else could.
Yep. He adopted the Uyghur script as the official writing system of the empire. So all the laws and decrees and everything that could be written down and, spread throughout the empire.
That's amazing. What made him realize that literacy was so important if he couldn't even read himself?
It just shows how smart he was, He was a pragmatist. He understood what it took to be a good leader, and he knew that a written language was essential.
It seems like that's a theme we keep coming back to. Genghis Khan as this, ultimate pragmatist, always looking for the most effective way to get things done.
Totally. He was all about adapting, being strategic, and never being afraid to, learn and try new things. But even the best leaders make mistakes, right?
Oh, of course. So were there any big failures during his time as Khan?
Definitely. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Like his campaigns against the Western Shia, those were brutal. Dragged on forever, lots of casualties on both sides. It proves that even Genghis Khan wasn't invincible. Sometimes things just didn't go his way.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that history isn't always, a straight line to victory. There are always setbacks and surprises and things you just can't predict.
Yep. And even the most successful leaders have to deal with those things. Actually, you know what one of his biggest challenges was? Figuring out who would take over after he died.
Right, the whole succession problem.
Exactly. He didn't really have a clear plan for that. And that's a big reason why the empire eventually split up, after he was gone.
It shows that building a powerful empire is one thing. Making sure it lasts after you're gone, that's a whole other challenge.
For sure.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Military strategy, environmental impact, progressive policies, personal mysteries, ultimate failure in the end. It's been a really interesting look at Genghis Khan.
Totally. I think what's most interesting to me is how much he challenges our assumptions. I mean, yes, he was a ruthless conqueror. We can't forget that. But he was also this incredibly smart strategist, a practical leader, and in a way, someone who helped shape the world we live in today.
Exactly. And I think that's a good takeaway for everyone listening, History is messy, and the people who shaped it are complicated. Genghis Khan was a product of his time. With all the good and the bad that came with that, he was a powerful figure, no question. But he was also a human being, with his own desires and flaws and contradictions, just like all of us.
Well said. And as always, we encourage you to keep learning and exploring, dig deeper into the story of Genghis Khan and all the other fascinating people who have left their mark on history. You never know what you might find.